Hello, and welcome to my lecture on the Nicomachean Ethics, books 1 and 2 by the classical Greek philosopher Aristotle. So here's a nice picture of him, blow up from, it's a close up from a very famous painting, The School of Athens. And there it is. Aristotle has been influential, from his own day even to ours. In fact, his thought on ethics, especially in the last 40 years, has had a kind of renaissance in philosophy. And there are contemporary thinkers who are taking him very seriously and putting him up as a serious contender for uh, a serious contender with contemporary philosophers as well as major modern thinkers. Um, this is a close-up of Aristotle and his teacher, Plato. So you'll notice that without going into the details here of the differences between Aristotle and Plato, you'll notice that Plato is pointing up and Aristotle's hand is pointing out. Remember, this is a close-up, again, from Raphael's painting, The School of Athens. So Plato is pointing up as though he's pointing beyond or outside of this world. Because for Plato, the most important thing was beyond this world. The most important things were outside of this world. The forms, if you know anything about the doctrine of the forms, for Plato, were beyond or transcended the world, this world of flux and appearance. For Aristotle, all there was this world. So he's pointing his fingers kind of out at this immanent world, the one that's right here, that we're at grips with. For him, that was the only world. And so in many ways, that difference, and it's a difference in their metaphysics, right? Their theories of reality. But that difference leads Aristotle to pay much closer attention to this world and to this life. For him, there was no life beyond this one. There's just this life. And we get one shot at living it well. And, I want to get ahead of myself. That's what the Nicomachean Ethics is about, is how to live this life well, how to do the human thing well, and what is the human thing. All right. You also notice that the book that he's holding on his hip there is the Ethics. And I guess it could have been, he wrote 2 books with ethics in the title, but I think it's the Nicomachean Ethics almost certainly that he's intended to be holding. All right. There's a lot of wisdom in Aristotle, and I think that of the ancient texts, it repays you in practical advice for living a good life. This is Alexander the Great. Aristotle was known for being non-Athenian, yeah? So unlike the other 2 great classical philosophers of the golden age of ancient Greece, Socrates and Plato, Aristotle was born in Stagira, so is sometimes called the Sagirite, in Macedonia. Macedonia is also where Alexander the Great comes from. And in fact, after studying from the age of 17 to the age of about 37, so he studied with Plato for 20 years. He left Plato's academy, and he was for a time the tutor of Alexander the Great. And then he goes on to found his own school called the Lyceum. This is a 15th century engraving of Plato and Aristotle fighting. Not fighting, they're arguing. This is what philosophers do. And we're skipping chapter 6 of book 1, but I think I should almost read a bit of it to you. It's the book where it's a little digression, which is why we're skipping it for time. There's a little digression where he kind of reluctantly argues directly against his old master, Plato, and the Platonists. And it's worth reading. He says, is reluctant to disagree with a friend, but we're more interested in the truth, even more important than friendship. That's really the spirit of philosophy, and I hope that some of it rubs off on you in this class. We want to know the truth, as Plato says. The true philosopher longs to see, has a passion for a sight of the truth, as one translation has it. All right, I'm going to get my face off of the slides here so it doesn't eat up all the, it doesn't eat up all the bandwidth to download my lecture. But let's jump in to the text itself. Okay, so I'm going to run through some quotes, pulled some quotations from the reading from books 1 and 2, and I have some other supplementary slides. But let's begin at the very beginning, book 1. Book 1, chapter 1. Every skill and every inquiry, and similarly every action and rational choice, is thought to aim at some good. So the good has been aptly described as that at which everything aims. So this is, I guess, his definition of the good. And Aristotle's ethical or view of ethics is sometimes called a teleological view because it emphasizes the goal or the end of action. So it's end goal directed, right? Telos, which is the word from which we get teleology, it means end or goal. So good here is being used in the sense of end or goal. And it's an awkward way to use the word good, but it's something you need to get used to if you're going to wrap your head around Aristotle's view of ethics, right? So, yes, good means end or goal. So if you're baking a cake, what's the good of the activity of baking a cake? What's the end or the goal? Well, it's a cake, right? Having a cake. And having a cake eating the cake also is a goal. It's just pleasure, right? So the good of eating the cake would be pleasure, and so forth. This is how he's using the word good here. All right. I'm not going to read all the quotations that I pull. You can pause it and read it yourself if you like. That would be useful, especially if you haven't already read the text that was assigned. I'll especially not read the longer ones, I think. Here we have a point that he makes about activities and their respective goods or ends. Right? The end of bridle making is horsemanship. The end or goal or good of horsemanship is generalship, right? Or making war because you want horses to pull chariots so that you can win wars, right? And so on and so on. So there's a relationship between all the different goods or goals of all the various activities, actions, or skills or sciences, as our translation has it. Science here, by the way, is being used in a very broad sense, not just in the sense that we usually use it in English, which is limited to natural science. Aristotle here is using it in the sense of just any attempt to gain knowledge about some part of the world. So in this sense, math and biology are both sciences, right? And in fact, horsemanship is a science too, because you have to know something about horses. So at any rate, it's just nice to point out that the word science can have a very broad sense, but usually in English it's limited to what are properly called the natural sciences, such as biology and geology and so forth. At any rate, philosophers tend to use it in the broad sense probably more often than anybody. All right, so all the things that we do are kind of related to each other. To the other things that we do, and all the things that we seek, the goods of all our activities, are sort of, you could sort of order them in terms of subordinate activities in sciences, so that, bridle making is subordinate to horsemanship, which is subordinate to generalship, which is subordinate to a higher good as well, right? And Aristotle reasons that if everything is this way, there must be some good that is the highest good that we are always seeking, whether we know it or not. We always seeking in everything that we do is sort of the highest or supreme good that we're seeking for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else. So we seek the good of horsemanship for the sake of winning wars. But is there some good that is supreme in the sense that we seek it for its own sake and not so that we can sort of use it to get something else? This would be the goal or the point of our life. So Aristotle's treatise here, the Nicomachean Ethics, is about the point of our life, the meaning of our life. And it may seem a little dry, especially compared to Plato, who is such a craftsman. And actually Aristotle was a great craftsman as well. He also wrote dialogues like Plato did, but we only have about maybe a third of the writings of Aristotle, right? At any rate, his treatise here may be a little dry, but what he's talking about is a subject that at some point in our life, especially when you're young and in college and have a little bit more time than you will later in your life when you get out and go to work, have a little time to think about. We should spend the time to think about it, and that is, what the hell is the point of it all? So Aristotle is going to tell us, not only it is a work of ethics, yes, so he's going to tell us ultimately how to live, but also in doing so, he's going to tell us what the highest goal for our life should be, which is to say, he's going to tell us what the point of our life is. You can agree or disagree, but it's a cool question to ask if you haven't already. You get to ask it in philosophy classes. All right. Yeah, is there some end that we want for its own sake? That everything else that we want is for the sake of this end or goal or good. And if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, then clearly this would be the good. You can almost put like capital G, capital T, the good. Indeed, the chief good, the supreme good, right? Different from Plato's supreme good, but enough about Plato. But because it's in this world, it's something that we achieve if we achieve it at all in this life, and this should make a little more sense as we move along. So that's what we're after. What is the highest good of all my activities? If we knew it, it'd be great. He says, like an archer. Then we'd have a better chance of hitting the mark. If we knew what the target was, if we knew what the highest good was, then we'd have a better chance of actually achieving it in this life and living the good life for a human being in the particular way that it's played out for me as the not just the kind of thing that I am, but also the specific person. It's going to be different for me than it is for you, but it's still the same goal. This will make more sense in a little bit later. So we're into book 3 now. Book 1, chapter 3. Aristotle, early on in his treatise on ethics here, makes, I think, a very wise decision. And he rejects the idea that we can have absolute certainty in ethics. Ethics is about our life. It's about how we should live. And human beings, in case you haven't noticed, are pretty sloppy at living most of the time. And so for Aristotle, the theory of ethics is also going to be a little bit sloppy. All we're going to get is generalizations. Our truths that we come up with in ethics, according to Aristotle, are going to be true sort of for the most part, right? So we have to be content, as he says, to demonstrate the truth sketchily, and in outline. because we're making generalizations on the basis of generalizations. But, he points out, it's a mark of an educated person not to look for more certainty than the subject matter allows. In ethics, the subject matter is our life, and it just doesn't allow for a high degree of certainty. This ain't math, right? Young people, do not pause it. Don't go away. You're still going to get tested on it. You don't get an out because Aristotle thinks that you are wasting your time. Or rather, I guess, I'm wasting my time if you are young, right? A young person is not fitted to hear lectures on political science. Why? Because it concerns life. And you don't know enough about life because you haven't lived long enough. You haven't experienced life enough. And the other thing he points out, or claims, that you tend to run after your feelings, and it's harder for young people to control their feelings, right? They feel madly in love one day, and they just run off and get themselves into trouble every time, right? They get angry, and they haul off and swing. So because of that, how do you not, you have to be sort of, this will make a little more sense later, you have to have developed certain habits that take time to develop, according to Aristotle. You have to be sort of in the habit of not hauling off and swinging every time you get pissed off, even if you're in the right. You got to be in the habit of being in control of your emotions, and that takes living, right? Yes, for Aristotle, he puts a lot of stock in being raised well, because before you can study the theory of ethics or the theory of the good life for a human being, you need to sort of already be developing the habits that you're going to want to hone once you, when you get older. Another thing to point out is he's not just picking on young people, young in age, right? But people who are young in character, or as he puts it here, juvenile in character. You know, I got a cousin that is, as they say, 42 going on 15, right? He's lived a long time. He's had a lot of experiences, but he didn't have his mind in the game. And as a result, he ain't learned anything. And so he's still too young to benefit from the theoretical discussion of the good life for a human being. Again, all of this will make more sense. Aristotle, you know, he is interested in this world. He doesn't believe in an afterlife. The good for a human being is something, as we'll see, is going to be an activity. It's something we do and fulfill in our life here, or not at all. Some people miss it, and it's a great tragedy, because it's the point of things. It's the one thing you're supposed to do for the kind of thing that you are in nature. And to fail at that is literally to fail at life, for Aristotle. All right. Most people think and agree about what the highest good is called, since both the masses and sophisticated people call it happiness. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the masses here, the Greek is literally hoi polloi, and which is a word in English, just hoi polloi. It means like the like, I don't know, unscrubbed masses, the uneducated, unsophisticated, usually poor, but not necessarily, the ones without culture, the hoi polloi, the masses. It literally means in Greek, the many. Hoi polloi, the many. As opposed to the sophisticated, right? We both call it happiness, whether you are the hoi polloi or whether you are the sophisticated. But they disagree about what happiness actually means, right? On like the substantive level. Like they have different conceptions of happiness. The masses, as we're going to see, think that it's pleasure and they seek pleasure. And then there are the philosophers. We have a very different conception of happiness. And the word here, this is important. I want you to know this Greek word, eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. It's the word that is translated here, not incorrectly, as happiness. Eudaimonia is the Greek word for happiness. But it is, in a very important sense, very different from the way the word happiness is used in English by most people today. Eudaimonia means happiness, yes, but it does not mean psychological happiness. It does not mean pleasure. So we think if we eat a cake or something, we have pleasure from it, and that's happiness. Aristotle has a much more, and the Greeks generally, this word is also used by Plato, and it means happiness, but it's a more nuanced view. Happiness is often translated as well-being, but by far I think the best translation, and always keep this in mind when you're reading Aristotle, flourishing. Flourishing is something that all living things can do, right? For Aristotle, there's something that each living thing is supposed to do for the kind of thing that it is, and for that individual being then to flourish is to work towards achieving that good or that goal, and that's happiness. There's the human thing, and when we do it well, we flourish. Just like there's a thing for plants to photosynthesize and grow towards the sun, whatever, right? They do their thing, and they flourish. That's eudaimonia for a plant. It doesn't make sense to, except by by analogy, to talk about a happy plant. But it does make sense to talk about a flourishing plant or a flourishing dog. My doggy Daisy, right? She's flourishes. She's got what she needs. She runs and chases, barks at the deer in my front yard. She's, tries to go after the neighbor's cat, and digs holes. She's a terrier, right? She digs holes in the yard, and she's like doing the dog thing, and she's doing it well, and she's flourishing. So Aristotle thinks that nature gives us the highest good or goal that we're supposed to seek out in our life and achieve. And that goal is happiness, understood as eudaimonia, or flourishing. And when we do the human thing well, we flourish. So it's happiness not in the sense of psychological happiness or pleasure. It's happiness in the sense of doing the human thing well. The pleasure will come eventually if you do it well and you develop the right habits. Then it will also feel good. But for Aristotle, the feeling good part of happiness comes at the end of the game, not at the beginning. In fact, early on, it won't always feel good to do good unless you are really flourishing. And then the emotional side will kick in and actually help reinforce the flourishing life. All right, we're at 20 minutes, so I'm going to cut it off and come back and pick up on this slide in the next video.